The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for the 16th of December 2015 opened up with gold at $1,073.08 an ounce, silver $14.16 an ounce, Texas crude $37.35 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 453 U.S. currency. Today in history, Thursday, December 16th, 1773, the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians, board 3 British East India Tea Company ships and dumped roughly 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party was the American colonists' response to the British Imposed Tea Act of 1773. In recent news, the Department of Homeland Security activated the National Terrorism Advisory System, which replaced the old color-coded terror warnings for the first time since its creation in 2011 today. The agency is warning the public of self-radicalized actors who could strike with little or no notice. A bulletin issued by DHS Secretary Jay Johnson stated that the system will be enforced for the next 6 months or until events dictate otherwise. Under this new amended advisory system, periodic bulletins will be issued to inform the American public of threats or concerns identified by DHS personnel. David Edward Abbott, a police detective who once made national news when he took out a search warrant, which he never issued, to photograph the genitals of a 17-year-old teen for sexting obscene pictures to his 15-year-old girlfriend, barricaded himself in his home and shot himself yesterday as Prince Williams County police officers tried to serve a warrant charging him with indecent liberties and using a communication device to solicit sexual offenses from minors. Evidence shows Abbott soliciting sexual acts by phone, text, social media, and email for more than 2 years from a 13-year-old boy who he met while coaching for a local hockey league. Apparently not the only 13-year-old boy who was solicited, with there being disclosed another victim of harassment back in 2009. As irony would have it, David Abbott served on a task force that investigates crimes against children. Hyun-Soo Lim, pastor at the Light Korean Presbyterian Church in Toronto, was sentenced by North Korea's Supreme Court to life in prison with hard labor today for what it is calling crimes against the state. He's been in detention since February, and state prosecutors were seeking the death penalty for such frivolous charges as harming the dignity of the supreme leader, attempting to use religion to destroy the North Korean government, disseminating negative propaganda about North Korea to Koreans overseas, and for aiding and abetting U.S. and South Korean authorities in smuggling North Korean citizens out of the country.
Good evening and welcome here on this Thursday, the 7th of January, 2016, our second show of the new year. I hope you're all doing well, and that would be the second show of INN World Report Radio, International Newsnet World Report, which comes to you on Tuesdays and Thursday nights here on the great Logos Radio Network. And I'm the lucky guy who gets to bring it to you. My name is Tom Kiley, and I'm your host we're in our 8th year now, I think, here on Logos and its previous incarnation, and it's all good. We like to think of this program as a sort of an open university. I know basically I'm just trying to teach myself. I do a lot of research, and I meet a lot of people, and I read a lot of good things, and then I reach out and I say, hey, there's this incredible audience of people who listen to the program that I do 2 nights a week, and I'm sure they'd like to hear from you directly, and many people respond favorably to that, and we have some great people to come on the show, people who are researching and writing and talking about either issues that are not being talked about or issues which are being talked about but are not being talked about honestly, typically by our politicians and mainstream media, even in academia. church leaders even, who knows? So that's what we do. And tonight is no exception. John Walsh will be returning to the program. I think we had John on about a year and a half ago. And John is a true anti-war activist, not one of these partisan anti-war activists, like all of them that sat out the Obama presidency because he was a liberal. No, he's really against war, no matter who's in the White House. And he writes to that effect oftentimes. He writes in Counterpunch, and antiwar.com picks up his writings. And he just wrote a piece, I would say excoriating even, the liberals who are, having a hard time with Donald Trump and are holding him to a totally different standard than they're holding Hillary Clinton to. So he poses the question, who's the real racist, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? And it's a hell of an article that he wrote, and so I thought I'd have him come on the show. He dug up a quote from Donald Trump in Esquire magazine back in March of 2004. Now, March of 2004 was 12 months after the invasion of Iraq. Okay, 12 months. And in that interview, he just rips the whole thing apart. Terrible mistake, tremendous loss of life. Not just ours, but all those young Iraqis that are being killed. Who, with all of these yahoos in office and all these talking heads in the media, once in a while you'll hear them crying about, the 4,000 plus troops that we've lost in Iraq. You'll hear them crying about the money we spent maybe, but nobody gives a hoot about the 1 million or so dead Iraqis, many of whom are not combatants whatsoever. Old men, women, and children. Okay, not to mention many Iraqi fighters who are doing the same thing that Chris Kyle or any of these other people would do if Iraq invaded the United States. They're defending their country from a foreign invader. All right, that's where we're fighting against in Iraq. People who were defending their country, just like so many people listening to this show would do the same thing themselves. I saw that movie, American Sniper. It's on the cable now. And, it's totally one-sided, totally from the point of view of people who apparently don't understand what's going on there. And they take these people in Iraq who are fighting foreign invaders, and they for the most part, they make them look like real nasty people. There's another sniper, and he's a real bad guy. He's doing the same thing that all the SEALs would be doing in this country if somebody invaded us. But we have Clint Eastwood making a movie trying to get us to viscerally have a gut reaction against people acting patriotically in their own country. What a good job. Anyway, John Walsh will be coming on. I think he wrote a smashing piece. And then Caleb Maupin will join us. I'm getting good feedback. He's a new guest on the show. He's a hardworking young guy here in New York. He's at the UN a great deal. He does some very interesting writing. He travels around. He was in Iran about a month and a half ago. And I've asked him to come on, this crazy dust-up with Saudi Arabia. They killed an important Shiite cleric. And it's causing quite a stir, and it's raising tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Shia and Sunni Islam. So that's that. That's what's coming up. John will be joining us in about 20 minutes or so. In the meanwhile, let's open up the phone lines. 512-646-1984. You can get right through. Give us a call, 512-646-1984. What do you think about Donald Trump? Certainly, it's a phenomena. He represents a phenomena that is going on all around the world right now. People are getting disgusted. They're going out to the fringes. They're going outside of the mainstream. Not just in this country, in Great Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, now head of the Labour Party, he is so threatening to the powers that be in England that the Labour Party itself, the bigwigs in the Labour Party itself, trying to get rid of him. And because they're all bought and paid for. They're all bought and paid for. So people are going out to the edges. Marine Le Pen in France, head of the National Front, which has always been considered a bad joke. Nationalists, extremely nationalist party, did very well in some of their elections recently. In Portugal, the left coalition defeated. They didn't have enough votes to take power themselves, but they prevented the center-right government from taking power again. This is all earth-shaking. Of course, we had Syriza in Greece. Ireland is starting to consider it. Finland is starting to, reconsider some of this stuff. It's interesting. Let's see what happens. Donald Trump in this country representing the anger and the frustration. And the more, this guy, he's crazy like a fox. The more they try to bring him down, the more he comes back and hits him right back. The other day, Hillary Clinton they were having a back and forth about gun control or something. And I think Trump said something to the effect, well, if guns don't make you any safer, Hillary, why don't you tell your bodyguards to disarm? Very good. What a comeback. If guns don't make you any safer, then tell you why are you going around with armed bodyguards? What the heck? What's the difference? And then, again, because Trump is so, he's rocking the boat all over the place because he's not on script like all the other candidates are, for the most part. And this is rankling some feathers in politically correct England. So some people in England circulated a petition. And I don't know, in England, if you get 100,000 signatures or something like that, you can get something put forth in front of the parliament. And they're asking the parliament to take a vote to ban Donald Trump from entering Great Britain. See, this is the way it works with political correctness. Okay, if you don't have a good argument against somebody, then you want to shut down the conversation totally, or shout them down, or try to ridicule them down. It's a technique that's used by a lot of people. Not just politically correct people, but it's usually an indication that you don't have anything to say. Have a debate, air it out. But no, they want to keep Donald Trump from entering Great Britain. I doubt if it will pass in the parliament, but Cameron, the prime minister, is saying that he doesn't know if it'll pass, but he certainly agrees with the sentiment. So Donald Trump came back today. He's got a couple of big golf course deals that he's putting together there. And he says, well, his corporation announced that if he can't go to England, obviously he can't go to see these projects. He's going to pull the projects. You know how much he's spending on these two projects? A total of about $1 billion, billion investment going to be pulled out of England. And I can't blame him if he can't go to England to see how it's going. Why should he do it? That's a lot of jobs. Well, let's see what happens. And he's crazy like a fox, because I think that will not pass the British Parliament anyway. But he gets that jab in there, and it makes it sound like if they don't pass it, they were afraid of losing the money, which may or may not have any effect on it. Like I said, but it's a protest vote, I suppose. What do you think? 512-646-1984. And I spoke with Christoph Lehmann today. We'll have him on the show next week, it looks like. And finally, very, very happy to tell you all that I finally made contact with Alison Weir, the courageous crusader, pardon the term, in that part of the world. You ought to watch out. But the woman from California, I think she was a writer or a reporter at one time. And she decided some years ago to go to Palestine for herself, to see for herself what was really going on there, because we've all heard so much about it growing up, and the Palestinians and the terrorism and this and that. And she went there and she was totally shocked to find that it was nothing like she'd been led to believe, that these poor people are totally oppressed. And she's been working on helping Americans to become more aware about the problem ever since. And she formed an organization called If Americans Knew. So Allison's going to be on the show hopefully within a week or two. We're arranging that now. We're checking everybody's schedule. That'll be a really fascinating interview. She was part of the pro-Palestinian fundament for a long time. And now recently, however, she's come under attack by members of the sort of anti-Zionist pro-Palestinian coalition. She's come under attack. And it seems like the attack is coming from Zionist, or as Gilad Atzmon calls them, the anti-Zionist Zionists, okay? Because a lot of people who portray themselves as being anti-Zionist are actually fundamentally still in favor of the fundamental principles of Zionism, it seems. So it seems like she's not coming under attack from all parts of that movement, but from the Jewish part of that movement. And we're going to have her on to find out why. They're trying to shut her down and kick her out, drum her out of the Corps, and it's causing quite some discussion in that community. Anyway, Alison, we're coming up on the program. That's going to be very exciting. Hopefully, I'm not sure if we're going to get her on next week, but if we don't, it'll be the week after for sure. Anyway, kind of cold here in New York, and I guess it's cold up in Iowa. They're getting ready for the caucuses. Give us a ring, 512-646-1984. Going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Baby ambassador to England or France, may like to gamble, might like to dance, maybe the heavyweight champion of the world, but you got to serve somebody. Hey, you gotta serve somebody. Maybe the devil.
All right, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Crowley, INN World Report Radio, Tuesday and Thursday nights here on the Great Logos Radio Network. John Walsh will be joining us in about 15 minutes from California. He writes for Counterpunch and antiwar.com. Just wrote an incredible article about Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. Who's the real racist? And it's very enlightening. And, you know, clearly a lot of Republicans like what Donald Trump is saying. And most other people don't. A lot of Democrats do as well, but the liberals are going nuts. And you know, I don't like everything he has to say, but then there's never been a candidate who I liked everything that they had to say. But I can tell you what, he is far and away number one in the entire field of candidates, Republican and Democrat, as far as anti-war is concerned and anti-interventionism is concerned. He is absolutely miles ahead of anybody else. He's been on the record for over a decade, that the war in Iraq was a disaster, was a stupid idea. We should have never done it. Saddam Hussein might not have been a great guy, but he ran a tight ship, kept Al-Qaeda out of there, kept religious fanatics out of there. Then he said going into Libya was a bad idea, and I hope the chickens come home to roost on this for Hillary Clinton. The damage has been done. The damage has been done. Libya has been destroyed. The women of Libya, thanks to Hillary Clinton, have been set back into the Stone Age. Okay? Instead of a modern African country, which Libya was, the leading country in Africa on index after index after index. All right? Literacy, healthcare, housing, and so many other things. I'm sure the women had much more opportunity there under Gaddafi than they have no opportunity there now. None. Because there's religious crazy fanatics that work for U.S. foreign policy and crooked governments in the Middle East, like the Gulf states that are monarchies. There's no democracy in Saudi Arabia. How come they don't get an Arab Spring? They funded the hijackers on 9/11, if you even believe that story, but they certainly funded them. They funded Al-Qaeda. They helped us set up Al-Qaeda. Remember bin Laden? Where's he from? Saudi Arabia. And they're running ISIS for us now too, or for themselves as well. They're no friend of this country. All right, so that's where a lot of this religious fanaticism is coming from, and it's running rampant now in Libya. Thank you very much, Hillary Clinton. No friend of women. Worst thing that could happen to women if she becomes president. At least women in other countries, dark-skinned women anyway. So I hope those chickens come home to roost. Donald Trump, bad idea. He said it was a bad idea. And he says Syria's a bad idea. And he says, and this drives him crazy. This drives the politicians and the pundits crazy. He said what Vladimir Putin is doing in Syria is good. They don't know how to, they just spit blood when he says stuff like that. They don't know how to respond because ISIS is not supposed to be attacked. Otherwise, it would have been attacked over the last 2 years when we just let them do whatever they wanted. All right. It's really funny. I feel sad. I feel bad for Barack Obama because he knows the real deal. He knows that ISIS is not really the enemy because they're taking out Syria, which the great Anglo-American Zio oligarchy want taken out. So they're working for us. They're a wrecking crew, just like Al-Qaeda was a wrecking crew for us in Afghanistan. All right. You know, we can't send American troops into Syria. It'd be very difficult. There's not enough reason. They already tried the weapons of mass destruction lie. You can't go back to that one. So they get a mercenary force to do it instead of Arabs. Oh, it looks just like it's a fight between Arabs now. They wouldn't be doing any of it if they didn't get set up and funded by the Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United States. We're all behind that. And Obama knows it. And it's like, that's why I didn't bomb them, because they really work for us. But you see, they can't come out and say that. They can't come out and say that because now they're killing Christians and they're doing whatever they want. And the voters back home here in the States wouldn't be happy if they understood the connection, which most people don't. But Obama understands it. And he's like, hey, wait a minute. Now that the campaign is happening, they're giving me crap for it, heck for it, whatever you want to call it. But, I'm not allowed to defend myself. I'm not allowed to tell the truth, which is, nobody's supposed to go after them. Vladimir Putin, we can't control him. He's taking it serious. You're not supposed to take ISIS serious. And the Republicans, it's so funny. You watch Fox. Oh, he's letting ISIS. Of course he's letting ISIS. And I got news for you. If it was a Republican president, they would have been letting him do it too. Because that's what the big boys want. That's what the oligarchy wants. But the oligarchy does not control, totally anyway, Russia and Vladimir Putin. So I almost feel, like I said, I almost feel sad for Obama. going to be talking about stuff like that. Now, back to Saudi Arabia. You know, there's been a change of leadership in Saudi Arabia. The old king died a couple of months ago, and now they got this another guy. He's pretty old too, but I think his son is really running the show. And they're hardliners, and they're trying to, you know, Saudi Arabia is the country that was basically created by the British out of Arabia. All right. This is Lawrence of Arabia. You know, I've been reading a lot about him lately, T.E. Lawrence. And if you were listening to our program just the other night, that we had Jacques Powles on talking about the beginnings of World War I. World War I, from the British perspective, was started because they wanted to take Iraq, what they used to call Mesopotamia, from the Ottoman Empire, from the Turks, because of its great oil reserves there that were known to exist even back then. Kirkuk and Mosul, right up in the north of Iraq, where the Kurds live. You've heard the names of those two cities? One sec. And that's what the British were after. They were getting oil for their conversion of their navy from coal to oil from the United States. They did not like that. They didn't like being dependent on the United States. Number one, it's a former colony. Number two, you never know when hostilities could break out again. And they also didn't like the idea of making their former slaves rich, you know, by buying oil from them. So you have this situation where they had to find an alternative venue, and it was discovered in Mesopotamia. And as Jacques Powles explains to us, you know, in those days, the Ottoman Empire was the old man of the empires. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble here with the organic alarm system tonight. It seems to be going off when it's not supposed to. Pardon the noise here. I think we'll get it straightened out in just a minute. But anyway, they couldn't do that because they couldn't just go in and take it like they had planned, because the Ottomans saw the handwriting on the wall and they knew the British were gunning for them. So they allied themselves with the Germans, who were also against the British at that time, as a protection. So now the British have to also fight Germany if they want to go for the oil in Mesopotamia. So that's how World War I got started. And we're still there. We're still there in that part of the world, still fighting over the oil, still trying to control all the oil. So that's your lost history. That's the kind of thing that we try to discuss on this program and make everybody aware of. It's the great game. All the wars are started for other reasons than the ones they tell you. And I'm going to have to calm these doggies down here. They're going nuts tonight. Anyway, that's what I call my organic alarm system. So let's call it a segment here. We're going to be running out of time shortly. We're going to be joined on the other side by John Walsh. Great article in Counterpunch. I recommend everybody check it out. It's called "Who's the Racist?" You know, who's the real racist, the Donald or Hillary? And he put some very, very good, very, very good arguments out there that Donald Trump is opening up the discussion. It's really an important discussion. Who is the arch racist, Hillary or the Donald? We'll be talking with the author of that article, John Walsh, in just a few minutes, right on the other side of the break. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio, and we'll be back with John Walsh right after this.
The Bill of Rights contains the first 10 amendments of our Constitution. They guarantee the specific freedoms Americans should know and protect. Our liberty depends on it. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be right back with an unforgettable way to remember one of your constitutional rights.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Imagine four eyes staring at you through binoculars, a magnifying glass, or a pair of X-ray goggles. That imagery reminds me that the Fourth Amendment guarantees Americans freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Fourth Amendment, four eyes staring at you, get it? Unfortunately, the government is trampling our Fourth Amendment rights in the name of security. Case in point, TSA airport scanners that peer under your clothing. When government employees demand a peep at your privates without probable cause, I say it's time to sound the constitutional alarm bells. Join me in asking our representatives to dust off the Bill of Rights and use their googly eyes to take a gander at the Fourth. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiley, INN World Report Radio, Tuesday and Thursday nights here on the great Logos Radio Network. Now, as promised, he's back with us. It's been about a year and a half or so since we've spoken with our guest, John Walsh, and he's back. Just somebody who I admire incredibly because he's truly a principled anti-war activist, and he writes for various publications, antiwar.com, and most especially Counterpunch. And his latest article is, Who is the Arch Racist? Well, I shouldn't say his latest article, but his latest article on this topic is, Who is the Arch Racist, Hillary or the Donald? Listen, John, thank you very much for what you write, and thanks for coming back onto INN.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I enjoy being on this program. But the article that you're referring to is actually, it makes a very simple point. I mean, Donald Trump has said some things that are, let's say, on the disgusting side about Muslims and others. On the other hand, he hasn't killed any of them. And Hillary Clinton is responsible directly and indirectly for the deaths of millions of Muslims. I mean, she voted for the war on Iraq and has stood by that until just recently when she started her presidential campaign. So all these years, she said, yeah, great thing. And right there, there's over 1 million dead, maybe 1.5 now, 4 million displaced. How many injured? I don't know the count. Libya was her war. I mean, Rand Paul has correctly said that was her war. That's what she pushed for. And Obama, skeptical, too weak to stop it. She lied to the UN, the Resolution 1973, which was proposed by the United States and was to give Libya a no-fly zone, but not to give the Libyan rebels, who turn out to be, a lot of them, Al-Qaeda and related organizations, not to give them an air force, but that's what happened. And so how can you say that somebody is a racist when he criticizes Muslims, some Muslims, he didn't say all, some Muslims, but you give a pass to somebody who's had her hand directly in and been the architect of the deaths of millions of them. That's what I find the Democrats and the Hillary promoters doing, and even some of the people working for Bernie Sanders who are very hesitant to call her out on it, because I think in the end they plan, if Bernie loses, to vote for Hillary, no matter what a vicious mass murderer she is. So,
well, yeah, didn't Sanders vote for the Libya operation himself?
I believe he did, yes, and I think Sanders, unfortunately, has a double weakness. First of all, he buys into the whole idea of the worldwide democracy crusade and human rights crusade, and apparently, in his view, it's okay to bomb people into respecting our version of human rights. And he's also a very dedicated Zionist. And his commitment to Israel, I think, blinds him to many injustices. It certainly blinded him to the injustice of the mass killings in Gaza, with Israel's bombing not so long ago of Gaza. So, he and his support, actually, he has this blind spot, but his supporters should not be forgiven for letting him have it. They should say, because most of them are probably very, very anti-war. But they're not conditioning their support of Bernie on his being anti-war, anti-empire, anti-interventionist. They give him a pass. So that's just as bad. They're not blameless in all of this. I think they're rather spineless, as a matter of fact.
I think it's a good comparison because there's a combination of the two. There's flat-out brainlessness as well with a lot of people that support Hillary, I think. Spinelessness as well. It's too inconvenient. Now, you would expect that, of all people, Bernie Sanders ought to be right on this. He's not. Hillary, of course, she's not right on it. That puts Donald Trump far and away, far and away as the anti-war candidate. And in your great article, you dug up this interview with him. He's been saying, Trump, I was against it before it happened. And my friends on the left are criticizing, oh, yeah, where did he say that? I show him some, that was only 7 years ago. You came up with the Esquire interview, which was, 12 years ago now? Going on 13?
I think Trump, there's a discrepancy there. Trump claims he was against it in 2003. Maybe not. He certainly was clearly against it in 2004. Before that, I don't know. The record. I couldn't find the record. He said he was against it, but 2004. That's way ahead of everybody else, except Bernie. He voted against it, and I commend him for that. That was a wise thing to do, and a just thing to do, the proper thing to do, the ethical thing to do. Hillary, on the other hand, I don't know. The worst thing about this, I always have to say this when we talk about Libya, is maybe your listeners know this, probably most of them do, so forgive me for repeating it. The United Nations has something called the Human Development Index. It's a number. They assign, the number embraces quality of gender equity, level of education, level of health care, standard of living. So those are the things that the Human Development Index quantifies as best it can in a single number. Gaddafi's Libya had the highest Human Development Index in all of Africa. Now, you could say, and I don't really understand, there are various versions of it, that his internal work, the way he ran the government was not democratic. I don't know how I don't know that. I do know what the Human Development Index in the United Nations says about him, and it says that he was the best ruler that Africa had seen at the moment. And for us to go in there and wipe him out and reduce that country to chaos and probably penury now is disgusting. And in the name of human rights and democracy, absolutely disgusting. And, it's like Vladimir Putin says, he says, do you realize what you've done? Does Hillary, do these people, does Bernie, do they know, do they have any capacity to understand what's happened to all those human beings? It boggles the mind that they don't seem to. Of course, history is full of people like this, but to me...
but this is our time, and these are supposed to be our people, and we're supposed to be a democracy. So if we let them get away with it, it's a reflection on us as well.
We're supposed to have some control over them.
Right. Listen, a couple of points as you're talking about Libya. Yes, I know that Libya was got the highest marks in Africa. Do you also know that before Colonel Gaddafi took over, Libya was the worst country in Africa by all those standards?
Yes, I know. It was in terrible shape.
Well, it was the worst. He took it from the worst to the best. So that'll put him in the crosshairs of these bastards just right then and there. Another thing.
The idea of a Pan-African Union and the idea of turning Libya and therefore other countries away from the petrodollar, that was, and the fact that he was taking too much, in the words of the West, too large a share of the profits in the oil of the oil revenues. And using them for his own people, that was also, those things were no-nos. That's why he was overthrown, and it was disgusting. And you know something? I think part of the reason that the many progressives today are so angry, and I think there is a palpable anger out there, angry at the likes of Hillary Clinton and Samantha Power and the rest, is because those people have taken the ideals that progressives have worked for, many over a lifetime, and use them to accomplish the opposite of their stated intention. I mean, it's a total betrayal. It's a total inversion. It is, in a way, taking the lifetime work of these people and using it for the exact opposite of what they intended. And that's why among progressives, there's a considerable gut hatred for the woman and the people that she works with and the people she works for. So,
listen, we're going on break. Hold on. We're speaking with John Walsh, and as you can hear, this is not the kind of thing that you hear from the left. It is what you're supposed to be hearing from them. Friends, welcome back. We're speaking with somebody who I admire greatly, John Walsh. John, besides Counterpunch and antiwar.com, where else are your writings available?
Well, actually, it's another a great outlet is dissidentvoice.org, Dissident Voice, all one word. And also another place which is quite amazing to me that publishes a lot of what I write is LouRockwell.com. Now, that's a libertarian conservative outlet, but I'm very impressed with him. He is very anti-war, and on the right, on the libertarian right and the paleo-conservative right, that website is read a lot. It gets an enormous number of hits. So that's another.
I find good information there. I find it something sometimes more enlightened than on a liberal site.
Oh yes, and he's a very moral guy. I mean, he is appalled by like many of us, by all the killing that's going on in our name and with our tax dollars. So, actually, we were talking before on the break about Hillary as a feminist.
Oh yes, heaven help the women of the world.
No, but there's also another argument. It used to be that women would argue that, if you should elect us because We have more maternal view of things. We'll be less violent. We, as you said, we'll change the way the game is played. Now the argument has been inverted, that for women to win an election, they have to be tough, tougher than the guys, more brutal than the guys. Well, and so that's all of a sudden you can say, well, you've got to tolerate that, but of course they'll also have to rule in that fashion to be reelected. So they're actually making the argument that if you elect me, people like Hillary, if you elect me, you can be sure I will be more brutal than any of my predecessors, or at least as brutal, because that's what it takes for me to advance my kind of feminism and for women to get ahead in the world that I live in, and so I'll do it that way rather than change the world. So if you want to end violence and wars, Hillary is saying basically, don't elect anybody like me. Don't elect women. Now that's really a little bit crazy for somebody who's a feminist to be making that argument, but that's what she does.
Her and Samantha Power as well. Another wingnut, if you ask me.
You know, you were also making the argument about, you're talking about Donald Trump. Well, to me, one of the things that Donald Trump, that Hillary's talking point always is, and she says it over and over again, the world is better off without Saddam Hussein. The world is better off without Gaddafi. The world will be better off without Assad. But Trump has the nerve to say this, something that no one else will say. The world was better and Iraq was better when Saddam Hussein was in power, better than it is now. Libya was better off when Gaddafi was in power, and Syria will be better off if Assad remains in power. That is the truth, and he is the only guy to say it. So that really robs her. And you could go on. You might say, well, the world better off? Well, certainly Iraq is not better off. Certainly Libya is not better off. Certainly Syria is not better off since that civil war has started. So Trump has
Europe is not better off with the refugees. If you believe that it's really ISIS doing these terrorist attacks, then nobody's better off.
Yes. So again, he takes that argument, which is her only talking point, and he says, "No, I don't agree with that. That's wrong." And in any event, if hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq have to die for Saddam Hussein to be overthrown, shouldn't they have some say in the matter? They didn't agree to this at all. They were invaded, a new regime was forced on them, and their country descended into chaos, which of course a lot of people in the region, especially the Israelis, just loved to see.
Well, Pepe Escobar writes about it all the time, the empire of chaos. It's kind of like if I can't run the show the way I want to, then nobody will be able to run anything. Chaos is better than somebody else having it. And a couple of things real quick. You mentioned Libya. The gold of Libya has been looted. Nobody seems to know where it went. We owe every single man, woman, and child in Libya $36,000. That's how much gold we took out of that country.
I know. It's incredible.
It's incredible.
One of the things is, I think another problem. Recently I haven't had much to say that's critical of the anti-war movement on the left, because it's almost all gone. There's hardly anything there anymore. It's just gone. You find a few words written here and there, but it's all badly compromised, all unprincipled. And I think there's a basic reason for it, is that you have to. I think a lot of your reaction will be due to your overall view of the world. And I think that, as they used to say, the main contradiction, the main battle today is not the battle for democracy, strange as that may seem, not the battle for human rights as we consider it in terms of legalities and so on, but the main battle today is against neocolonialism. The main battle for the past 500 years has been the battle of Europe to try to, and America eventually, to exert its control over the world, which it has managed to do to a large degree at great cost to the world, and the rest of the world fighting back. That's been the story of, that's been history for the last 500 years. That's the main thing. And what's happening now is that's changing. With the rise of China, especially, that is changing. And I think the United States is desperate. And no one can be number one. So when you talk about chaos, and this is Diana Johnston and many others make this point, is this is a very strange empire, because at this point it doesn't seek to really do anything except keep others down. What is the pivot to Asia about? It's only about keeping China poor as possible. That's what it's all about. Because if they all become, if they have a Western standard of living, then they'll be much, much more powerful than the United States. So what do? We're trying to stop it as best we can because we rely on their economy so much already. I think people who think about it, and maybe your friend from the Nixon administration has thought about it, is it's a fool's errand. It's an impossibility. But in trying to do this, as Hillary is trying, you can kill an awful lot of people and maybe blow up a substantial part of the planet before it's all over. But it's it's chaos and destruction. That's all it amounts to anymore. It has nothing else to offer the world, and it's pretty pathetic that we support it with our tax money.
Well, you mentioned democracy. It's really not a democracy being run as a democracy here anymore. You've seen the report, right, from the Princeton and Northwestern professor. Came out about a year and a half ago now. It's by all measurable angles, the United States is being run as an oligarchy. Average people have zero say anymore in it. When it comes to the anti-war movement, I used to say, what would be the difference between a Hillary presidency and a Jeb Bush presidency? You know what the difference would be?
Well, I don't think Jeb is quite as aggressive, frankly.
Well, and I said this before that Donald Trump was involved, but the difference between a Jeb Bush presidency and a Hillary Clinton presidency would be you'd get all the new wars with Jeb Bush and you'd get the return of the anti-war movement. But with Hillary, you'd only get the new wars. All you get would be the new wars with Hillary.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's very true. But I think this other thing about recognizing that the world, what does the average person in the world want? The average person in the world wants a decent life, wants a decent standard of living, wants to make sure that his or her family are taken care of. They want to make sure they have food. They want to make sure they have education. They want to make sure they have health care. The idea of whether they can vote for Tweedledee or Tweedledum is very low down on their list. And I think that's why China has had such a success. It's brought hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. The Communist Party there has, and the leadership and the party itself, they've done that. We have to recognize it. You might not like communist parties, but listen, they provided for the people. They've brought them out of poverty. This is much more important than anything else to these people, and it will be the same for the people of Africa, and the same for the people of Latin America, the same for most of the people in the developing world. And as opposed to the changes that have occurred in China, I've been going to Latin America since the 1970s, and really nothing has changed. There's still the same problems. It's still, Venezuela Cuba made some changes, but the other countries, Venezuela, they're not making it because they're too easy in some attempt to garner favor with Western liberals. They're much too easy on the opposition. You can't do that when the opposition is out to knock you off at whatever cost. So Latin America.
Well, just ask Salvador Allende. He'll tell you if he could, and
if he could, yes.
If he could,
you can't. The other side, they're very bold. I just noticed that in Venezuela, a couple of representatives were seated, even though the Supreme Court said they couldn't be. The opposition just...
John, hold on. We're going to run out of time. Can you stay with us for one more segment?
Sure.
Very good. We'll be right back. Top of the hour break with John Walsh on the other side of the top of the hour break. Right back after this. Alvin Lee, 10 years after, I'd like to change the world. Well, there's a guest who'd like to do that in a very positive way. John Walsh, always a pleasure to have him on. This, my friends, is a principled person. I dare say, John, you're probably like me on 51% of the issues or more. I probably come down as a traditional leftist or progressive, but that doesn't mean that I lost my brains along the way or my principles.
Yeah, I think, I want to go back to this thing, the way the general look at the world in terms of empire and the battle against neocolonialism, because I've noticed again and again, whether it's in the case of Egypt, whether it's in the case of Syria, whether it's in the case of what went on in Hong Kong, that the progressives in this country are talking, and their primary way of approaching these things is exactly the same way that the National Endowment for Democracy does it. Exactly. The words are the same. They talk about the worldwide movement for democracy, which, of course, the United States must lead. And even the progressives, many of them, they won't say the United States must lead it, but they're implying it. And that's just, and not only is it the wrong way to look at things, it's not what most progressives have been doing their whole lives. I mean, it is true. If back in the days of Vietnam, where it seems like history started, Korea, all the imperialism before that, it doesn't seem to matter. But back in the day of Vietnam, the Vietnamese regime was no great paragon of democracy. But nobody said anything about that. Nobody cared. They said, just get out of Vietnam. Democracy or not, we have no business bombing them. We have no business invading them. It was simple, period. That was it. And again, progressives in their lives have taken this stand. Their instincts for a lifetime were correct. And now many of them are turning their backs on it. They've taken the wrong path. Their instincts were right. The words they use now, their ideology that they've adopted, the worldwide democracy movement, whatever the hell that is, that's not how they've acted for all these years. Why? What has happened to the whole movement? It's very hard to understand, and I think part of the reason is that the ideology itself was not properly developed in some ways, and you could take it. The fact of the matter is that what's important for the world is not the struggle between classes within a country. The important thing for the world since the turn of the last century, the century before, has been the battle between the colonized countries and the colonizing countries. That's what it's all about. And people have understood this instinctively, and now they're turning their backs on it. It's very disappointing, actually, because that whole tradition is in some ways dying out. As a matter of fact, if anybody is preserving it, it's the libertarian and paleo-conservative, well, paleo is not so very well, right. That's astonishing to me. Absolutely astonishing.
Well, they go after, they corrupt. I mean, the money, they create the money from thin air, they have the money creation power, they throw it around. And you tell me, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Are you getting rich writing these beautiful articles? There you heard it, friends.
Actually, the only times I've been paid, I haven't taken the payment. I give it back. No, I don't need. I'm fortunate enough that I don't write for a living, and so I'm pretty much free to say what the hell I want.
Well, let me tell you something.
Good fortune. I think that's also why in the past people like I don't know what I'm thinking about that. Well, Linus Pauling, Albert Einstein. They had other things whereby they made their living, if you want to put it that way. Mm-hmm. They were free to be critics, and I think that it takes it. If you're writing for a living, and the people who are principled and who write for a living or opine for a living, my hat is off to them, because it's a very difficult road to hoe. I think it's very, very hard, because you can do that easily if it's only your well-being. But when you start to have a family and children and so on, and you say, I can't make any money, and it is a very, very, very difficult thing to do, to be a rebel in any society. So the people who do it, and do it not like me, but do it full time, my hat is off to them. Those are
you mentioned Albert Einstein. He was an ardent anti-Zionist.
What?
Einstein was an anti-Zionist.
Yes, I know that. That. In the end, he was, yes.
Yeah, and they offered him the presidency of Israel, and he turned it down.
Yes, and so I'm afraid it's the end of his life. I think he was getting very depressed and perhaps even a little cynical about what was going on. But if he just looked at the world and saw what was going on, there was very good reason to be cynical and depressed. Unfortunately, we have not yet blown ourselves up, so let's hope it stays that way. And I think it's more likely to stay that way if we keep Hillary out of the White House.
Hillary, or Hitlery, as some people call it. And what about the rise of the return of Russia? Vladimir Putin. I don't want to sound like a sycophant, but he certainly seems to be pretty agile when handling the Anglo-American Zio oligarchy. I mean, I learned a long time ago, never play chess with a Russian, even if he's really, really drunk.
Well, the thing about Putin is that I think in his moves, his diplomatic moves, I think that he has a big part of that is trying to educate us in the West. I think that he's trying to do things that will make a point and trying to educate us. And I think that they're paying much more attention to this, with RT and Sputnik News, and China's too. They're trying very hard the People's Daily, China Daily, Beijing Review, you name it. But you know what's interesting is that very few people in opposition in this country or in the West in general will quote those very valuable sources. For example, I have great respect for the people running antiwar.com, and they have the synopsis of the news. They clip all these articles and provide the links every day, but exclusively. There have been a few exceptions, mainly because I'm proud of them, but very few. It comes from the Western news sources, and whenever you use those, even if you use them for the facts, those facts are embedded in a matrix which has a narrative, the narrative of the West: Russia bad, Putin evil. So when you only use those things, you're putting out, even though you may think you have contradictory facts, and you do, you're putting out stuff that maintains the narrative. I think we can no longer just look at Western media. We have to look at what the Russians and Chinese and the Iranians are trying to tell us. Now, sometimes their news is not so good. RT, I think, is pretty good. China Daily, I think, is stupendous, and People's Daily, even better. But, they're pretty accurate, and I think people owe it. The left, certainly, should be looking at these things and saying, well, here's what China Daily said, and here's what the New York Times said. What makes more sense? You have to have at least that much open-mindedness, but it isn't out there. It is not. Maybe to some degree in Europe it is. I don't know, but it certainly is not part of our discourse here, and that's really a shame because these people are making a big effort to try to talk to us, and we're saying we won't listen.
I think Russia Today is providing us with a very good service. I laugh when even people on the left say, well, yes, it's paid for by the Russian government. Yeah, okay, well, what do you call Radio Free Europe? What do you call Voice of America? If we could do it, why can't they?
As a matter of fact, while you're at it, what do you call NPR? I mean,
I call it National Pentagon Radio.
That's what I think that's a very good name for it. I like to call it National Pablum Radio because it's very, very light. And really, sometimes on domestic matters, it gets into things a little bit more, just like the New York Times. But you can't very well lie to people about what's right before their eyes. Otherwise, your credibility will be shot. But on the other side of the world, where we can't see anything, where we have no direct experience, where it's all filtered, you can say pretty much anything you want. And actually, that's a big problem with the anti-war movement. Is a lot of effort is spent now trying to decipher. And it's an interesting question, trying to decipher, for example, what ISIS really is, who's manipulating it, who's behind it. Putin has been educating us about that bit by bit in ways that can't be denied. But, we really don't need to do that because we already know the answer. The answer is mind our own business and stay home. So maybe a little bit too much time is spent on trying to be scholarly. There's an epistemological problem there. We can't really get at the facts. We don't. There's a barrier between them and us, especially if we don't trust foreign media. So sometimes, I guess I'm partly guilty of this. Is we spend a little more time trying to analyze what's going on in places where it's very difficult, rather than just trying to spend that time implementing the solution here. And we know the solution is anti-interventionism. Period. No mystery. So, Ron Paul makes it very simple. Let's mind our own business and try to be happy and protect ourselves when necessary. But there's we're not getting anywhere. We're not doing anything for the people of the world by bombing the hell out of them. That's
we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere because, thank goodness, there's people like you in the world. The alternative media is getting stronger all the time. It is making a difference. Press TV, Russia Today, China Daily, those are becoming so successful that Kerry wants to ban them. That's a good indication.
That's true. There is pressure to stop RT, but I don't think they really can. I think they're going to. I think the main stumbling block there is, I think is us.
Listen, the main stumbling block here is that we're out of time. John, thank you so much, and may we have you back on sooner rather than later next time.
Yes, it's a delight, and keep up the great work. And anybody who wants to use my articles, tell them go right.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
good friends. Welcome back. Now, how'd you like that? That was a great discussion with John Walsh. He has not been on the show for a while. Let me know what you think. Just send me an email. Very easy to do. info@innradio.com. Now, our next guest is all lined up, and I'm speaking about Caleb Maupin. He's a relatively new guest on the show. I ran into Caleb, met him last fall at some protests at the UN. Very, very articulate, a rising young star, like so many other people that we've had on the show. He's the author of an interesting book called The Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis. Satan at the Fountainhead. Very interesting subtitle. You've got the Iranian accusation and what's her name, Anne Rind, all in one right there. Caleb, welcome back to INN.
Oh, thanks. Glad to be here, as always.
Well, that is am I correct in that subtitle? Are you thinking about both Ayn Rand and Iran when you say Satan at the Fountainhead?
Basically, yeah. I mean, the title of the book, I mean, the understanding is that certain forces have really maneuvered their way into control of the U.S. government. I often talk about the triangle of evil. We're talking about the big oil cartels, the weapons manufacturers, the military contractors, military-industrial complex, and the Israeli government and its network of supporters. And they have really kind of hijacked the government and really put into effect this free market neoliberal ideology that is just destroying the United States, destroying the world, and that it's all connected. And you can't really separate what's going on against the Palestinians. You can't separate that from the fact that the Midwest has been deindustrialized, that there's a police state emerging in the U.S. and our civil liberties are being stripped away. It's all very closely connected to the seizure of the U.S. government and the financial system here by these forces. That's really the point of my book, and I encourage people to check it out.
No, we encourage them too. Where do you sell this, on Amazon? Can they get it from a website?
Yeah, just go to Amazon.com. You can check it out there. Just type in Satan at the Fountainhead, Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis. It'll come right up. It's there, and I've sold a few copies already. And it's selling in Iran, actually. It's selling pretty well over there. And they've had TV specials about it, and it's getting a pretty good reception over there. But I feel like Iranians already know about this. They've been fighting against the Zionists and the big corporations and the oil capitalists here in the U.S. for so long. But I think it's people in the U.S. We need to come to terms with what's been happening to our country for the last 30, 40 years. You know, I think it's people here in the U.S. that need to read this book.
Well, people are coming to terms with it. If you look at the incredible level of support for Donald Trump, who, as you maybe read John Walsh's article, he is clearly an anti-interventionalist, all right, saying better things against war in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq than any of the candidates, including Bernie Sanders. And I think it's a sign that people are fed up, not only here in England with Jeremy Corbyn, in France now with Marine Le Pen. It's not right, it's not left, it's just not in the center. It's not center right, center left anymore. It's out on the fringes almost. Syriza, well, they've taken a wrong turn, but at least they represented something. Now you got the elections in Portugal. What say you? I mean, I think people are starting to wake up.
Well, I mean, in terms of Donald Trump, it's pretty clear he's not following the foreign policy script the way all the other candidates are. You know, he's saying things critical of Saudi Arabia. He's more friendly to Russia. And he seems to kind of not be part of the establishment in terms of foreign policy. However, I will say he's very viciously hostile to Iran and a fanatical supporter of Israel. And furthermore, it seems that he just plays up this kind of this phobia of immigrants, saying that the Latinos are rapists and murderers and things like that. And I mean, I could never support somebody like that. But the fact that he has so much support and he's an outsider and that he has his own money, I mean, it shows that the U.S. political establishment is in a crisis. I can certainly agree with that. And that he's. And
I can't blame people for taking the best chance of an outsider either, even if he is imperfect. And I haven't ever voted for anyone who I consider to be perfect before. And by the way, also Trump is misquoted on a lot of his stuff. He didn't say Mexicans are rapists, but there certainly are some among them, and he was speaking directly to that when his statement was taken out of context. And also, when it comes to immigration, he's quite clear. He's talking about illegal immigration. He's not talking about, legal immigration, although he has said that he proposes a ban on Muslims coming into the country until we can get the mess sorted out. But
and that's completely absurd as well. I mean, you're going to ban people from entering the U.S. on the basis of their religious beliefs, and I don't even understand, how do you prove someone's a Muslim or not? I mean, what is that going to be based on? Are they going to give you a quiz on the Quran before you enter the U.S. or something? I mean, that's pretty absurd as well. I mean, there's a lot of things about him that really I find a little unsettling, but at the same time, who's the alternative? He's kind of filling a void for a lot of people. Bernie Sanders is supposed to be the socialist. But he's a bomber. He's a warmonger. He's got a record of supporting bombing and destruction, supporting the Israelis' crimes. He's completely tied in with all the Wall Street corporations he's constantly denouncing. I mean, Bernie Sanders can be so phony. And I think when people see Donald Trump, it's funny. Sometimes for my work as a journalist, I go out and interview people on the street. They call it Vox Pops. And I'll meet Trump supporters. And I've noticed that a lot of people when they tell me they support Donald Trump, they're kind of giggling. They're kind of laughing out of one side of their mouth. And it's like they support him in a weird kind of way. It's kind of like they say like, oh, he speaks his mind. He doesn't hold back. They feel like he's being real with them. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of this feeling that he's not following a script like all the other politicians. He seems to be actually saying what he thinks. And that seems to be one thing that's kind of making Trump popular with a lot of people that traditionally vote for the mainstream of the Republican Party, I think.
I think he's actually he seems like he's shooting from the hip a lot more than he is, because a lot of times the knee-jerk reaction from his opponents on the right and the left is to strike back. And usually it's a trap, because they really haven't researched what he said. They didn't really quote him accurately. And he's got answers for them that they don't like. A lot of this stuff dies on the vine pretty quickly. I don't think he's truly advocating, that Muslims shouldn't be allowed to enter the country. I think under it, and he says it, that, this, first of all, he doesn't say this, but this whole immigration crisis is phony baloney. Okay. This is purely the result of, our diabolical actions in the Middle East. Okay. No question about it. It's a totally unnecessary crisis. And these people were probably better off staying close to home, so hopefully the conflict will be over and they could be repatriated. But then suddenly, after several years of this, all of a sudden, I think the powers that be found it beneficial to put pressure, particularly on the Europeans, to get more of the auxiliary troops out of NATO to get involved, that they unleashed this refugee crisis on them, and now it's coming to the United States as well. So I think that's part of it. And clearly, they're going to use it as an excuse to infiltrate, terrorists in here to perpetuate that whole problem.
Well, the Syrian refugee crisis would be over tomorrow if the money stopped flowing to al-Nusra and ISIS and all the other terrorist groups that have been funded by the United States, by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, by the United Arab Emirates, and by Turkey throughout this entire war. This war was imposed on Syria. You have to understand the Syrian war would have been over in 1 week if it weren't for the intervention from outside. This is not a civil war of Syrians fighting Syrian. These are foreign fighters coming into Syria and just tearing it up. And it's been going on. And this war could end. I mean, they often will say on TV, they'll say 250,000 Syrians are dead. And then they say as if this is somehow Assad's fault. No, it's the fault of the people who've been keeping the war going, sending more weapons. And everyone knows, by the way, that Turkey is the primary supporter of ISIS. I mean, it's been proven that the oil is going across the Turkish border, the oil that's being sold. Furthermore, weapons are going.
Well, and has it been proven? I mean, the Russians have shown us on satellite video. Now, and I point out, this is a desert. There's no trees. There's no clouds. Okay, this is perfectly well known by the United States and everybody else what's going on. Yet we allow it to happen all this time while bad-mouthing it at the same time. It's total phony baloney.
It's completely manufactured. And I must say, so all these people are fleeing their country. And frankly, a lot of the refugees in Jordan, mind you, are actually being forcibly removed from the country against their will. The Free Syrian Army is forcibly escorting people to the border where they're then met by the Jordanian army and then taken to these refugee camps. And these UN refugee camps, they sound pretty awful. They have big fences around them. The only way you can leave is if you join one of these terrorist groups, and then they'll escort you back into Syria, right? So, I mean, these refugee camps are not nice places. And it's fences around them. Sometimes they'll have girls as young as 8 or 9 getting married just so they can get out of them. I mean, the conditions in these refugee camps that are being maintained by the United Nations and other international bodies are just horrendous. And no one's...
What? The United Nations doing horrendous things? No. Oh, hold on. We're speaking with Caleb Maupin. We got to take a break, and we've got 2 more segments with him. So come right back. We'll be right back just after this.
The Bill of Rights contains the first 10 amendments of our Constitution. They guarantee the specific freedoms Americans should know and protect. Our liberty depends on it. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll be right back with an unforgettable way to remember one of your constitutional rights.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This public service announcement is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Most of us know that taking the Fifth means you're choosing to remain silent about a criminal matter. It's a good way to remember that the Fifth Amendment spells out what can and can't happen to you when you're accused of a criminal offense. The Fifth guarantees due process, prohibits trying someone more than once for the same crime, and lets you keep your mouth shut. The Founding Fathers inserted these constitutional provisions to protect citizens from torture. Back in the day, governments often used painful methods to extract confessions. The Fifth Amendment also prohibits the government from taking your house and land without paying you for it. That used to happen a lot, too. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht. More news and information at CatherineAlbrecht.com.
Chemtrails.
You're listening to the Logos Radio Network at LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Well, all right, good friends. Welcome back. I hope you're enjoying tonight's show. We're getting 2016 kicked off with a bang. Christoph Lehman will probably be with us next week, and Allison Weir from If Americans Knew will be joining us soon, too, in the next week or two. So we're going to keep the home fires burning here. John Walsh just gave us a great interview, and Caleb Maupin, a relatively new guest on the show, but we're going to have Caleb on a lot more. He's a fellow New Yorker, hardworking young guy. I can say that at my age. He's got a new book. I urge you to look it up. You can I'm sure you can query it. The Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis, Satan at the Fountainhead. And I'm starting to read the book myself, so we'll be able to get into detail with Caleb on that in future episodes. But Caleb, one of the reasons I asked you to come on the show tonight is because, I hope most listeners are familiar with there are two big factions within Islam, main factions. There are a number of factions, but the probably two largest schools of Islam are the Sunni branch and the Shia branch. And the Sunni branch being that which is dominant in Saudi Arabia, where Mecca is located, and the Shia branch being dominant in Iran, actually a Persian country, and also places like Iraq. And in my view, it seems to me that overall, especially through Saudi Arabia, the Sunni branch has gotten quite craven, decadent. They don't seem to support their fellow Muslims vis-a-vis the plight of the Palestinians, whereas the Shia branch has always felt a little inferior, going all the way back to the early days of Islam, and they've had their fights, literally death matches, and they are predominant in places like Iran, and they haven't kissed the butt of the Western imperialists. Far from it. And this is causing a great deal of tension now, especially in Saudi Arabia with the new regime. Can you talk to that and how they just killed this very, very popular Shia cleric?
Yeah, well, Namir al-Nimr is the top Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia. And you have to understand that, because the Saudi monarchy is Sunni, that in Saudi Arabia there is real oppression against people who practice Shia Islam. There's laws that they can only work in manual labor. They're not allowed to get higher education. Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia, almost all of them are oil workers because there's no other job they're allowed to do. So the oil fields, the people actually doing the labor, refining the oil and such, they are Shias. And because of this dichotomy, there's a lot of resentment among Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia. They feel like they're second-class citizens. They're just treated very badly. And so they tend to not like the Saudi monarchy. And the leader of the Shia community was this guy, Namir al-Nimr. And during the Arab Spring, he led a whole bunch of protests in Saudi Arabia. And they were peaceful demonstrations, and he was arrested. He was never given a lawyer. He was never given a chance to appeal. And just the first day of the year, January 1st, the Saudis beheaded him, from what I understand. And the response was an uprising among the oil workers in Saudi Arabia. There was uprisings in Lebanon. There were buildings burned in many countries, in Yemen and elsewhere. People were just furious about this. And in Iran, the Iranians actually took over the Saudi embassy and lit it on fire and burned it to the ground. So this was a huge provocation. I mean, it would be almost like like the Catholic Church, their main bishop in the U.S. If someone was to give him the death penalty or something, this was the main Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia, and they cut his head off. I mean,
and to be clear, from my understanding, never once did the guy preach sedition or being disloyal to the country or to the government. His beef was about inequality and about how Shias were being treated poorly. It would kind of like be grabbing Martin Luther King at the height of his time and giving him a death sentence and cutting his head off, I think.
Right. And I mean, Saudi Arabia has very, very strict laws. And so any activist or anyone who's criticizing the government in Saudi Arabia has to be extremely careful about what they say. You say the wrong thing, just insulting the king is a death penalty offense. You can get the death penalty for it. And the other thing that I think that people need to keep in mind, when we talk about Sunnis and Shias, you can have never entered a mosque in your life, but if you're from a certain neighborhood and you have a certain last name, you're considered to be Sunni or you're considered to be Shia. It's kind of like in Northern Ireland. If you're from a certain neighborhood, you're Catholic, or if you're from a certain neighborhood, you're Protestant. It doesn't matter. It's not about what you actually profess. It's about your background, and that people are identified with where they're from, who their community is. And so, you say, oh, well, if people, are being discriminated against, why don't they just change their religion? It's not that simple, right? This is a cultural thing. I mean, this is cultural discrimination that people are facing. And it's pretty brutal. And, it was just at the beginning of December, they had slaughtered 1,000 of the Shia Muslims in Nigeria. The U.S. aligned regime in Nigeria went out and killed 1,000 Shia Muslims and has taken the head Shia cleric in Nigeria into military detention, and no one knows where he is, and he still hasn't been heard from. He could be dead. We don't know. And over 1,000 Shias in Nigeria were killed. So this is just a pattern, and it's ongoing. Meanwhile,
by the way, do we see it happening the other way around? Do we see in Shia countries, dominated countries, them rounding up Sunnis and killing them?
Of course not. I mean, that's not occurring at all. In fact, the position that Iran is putting out at this point, their position is for there to be unity of all Muslims. That is their position. And I've been to Iran. I went to church on Sunday morning in Iran. I went to the Armenian Christian church, and this was in the middle of an Islamic republic, and they could not have been treated better. Afterwards there was a reception, and there were members of the parliament who came and gave an honor to the local patriarch of the Armenian church. And I mean, the Christians in Iran are treated far, far better than Muslims are treated in the United States, I must say. I asked them if there ever been a hate crime here, and they said, no, we've never experienced any discrimination here. Now the government itself does, put forward a Shia Muslim perspective, but there are Sunnis in Iran. There are Jews in Iran, who openly, I saw a synagogue in Iran, in Isfahan. When I visited the city of Isfahan, I saw the synagogue, very open, very there. Had a picture of a menorah in the front. I mean, it was in the middle of the day. I didn't go in because it was like the middle of the day.
Listen, it was Israeli terrorists who were bombing Jews in Iran in the 50s, trying to drive them out and get them to go to Israel. Okay, undercover.
Mossad has admitted that they did this.
Absolutely. So a lot of this stuff too. And I'll tell you another thing. It's overblown in the Western media to get us to try to go along with all the bloodshed in the Middle East. Rahed Jarrar, architect, Iranian, and great activist, been on the show many times. One of his parents is Sunni, one of his parents is Shia. He said, I didn't even know what my neighbors were, okay? Nobody really cared about it in Iraq, okay? I'm sorry, I said Iran. He's from Iraq. Right. So, in some of these secular places, it wasn't such a big deal, but we need to have an excuse to hang the empire of chaos on, so it's a very convenient one for people who don't know any different. And I'm sure it's different in Saudi Arabia itself, but it's way overblown in a lot of other parts of the Middle East.
Well, yes, and one interesting thing, after the U.S. invaded Iraq and toppled the government, they passed a law that no one who had ever served in the government could be a government official. I mean, because they would have been members of Saddam Hussein's political party. So everyone with any experience running the government was immediately removed. And then furthermore, the new IDs that were issued by the new Iraqi government, the U.S.-controlled Iraqi government, had your religious background on your ID. And that had never been done before. So your IDs all said Sunni, Shia, Christian, whatever your religious background was. And then they started assigning government jobs based on, your religious background. And it was like a setup. And you have to keep in mind, in 2006, Israel suffered a huge defeat at the hand of the Hezbollah organization. And when Israel invaded Lebanon, they were defeated by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Shia organization. So you have just after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and then in 2006, the defeat of of Israel by the most militant and most well-known Shia religious organization in the world. All of a sudden, the Saudi television and the Saudi media just starts blasting all over the world that Shia Muslims are the enemy, kill the Shias, Shias are apostates, the Shias are trying to take over the world. I mean, just hate for Shia Muslims constantly. I know recently Saudi TV was bashing the U.S.-Iran negotiations, and they tried to say that President Obama was a Shia because his middle name is Hossein, and that was being blasted all over TV. The reason the U.S. and Iran are negotiating is because Obama is secretly a Shia Muslim. All this kind of hate is coming out of Saudi Arabia.
And you can't kiss butt bigger than the Saudis, so that's so much for their brand of Sunni. We'll be right back, friends, with Caleb Maupin for our last segment right after this.
Increase in mental functioning.
All right, good friends, welcome back. Coming down the home stretch, Caleb Maupin with us. His new book is called The Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis, Satan at the Fountainhead. We're not talking about that tonight, but we will be shortly. Caleb, how do you want to wrap this up? We have another segment. You want to talk a little bit more about Saudi, or do you want to move on? Maybe talk about your book a little bit.
Well, I mean, we can talk about Saudi Arabia because I think we have to point out, we have to be aware of the fact that what's happened in Saudi Arabia with the killing of Namir al-Namir and what's happened in Nigeria with the slaughter of the Shia Muslims, that this has basically buried the hope for peace between the U.S. and Iran. Two U.S. aligned governments just attacked Shia Muslims and just attacked them. And furthermore, there are now new sanctions imposed on Iran because they are maintaining their missile defense system. So all this hope, everyone's hopes got up during the P5+1 negotiations, but that's all gone now. It's clear that the U.S. and Iran are going to remain enemies. And just today, Iran and India broke with the petrodollar. Did you see this?
No, I know. I've known it's been getting ready to happen, but tell us more.
Iran is selling oil to India, and India is not buying it in dollars. They're buying it in rupees, the Indian currency. And this is a huge, huge breakthrough. Oil is being sold not in dollars. And this is a big blow to the Wall Street oil corporations. For a long time, OPEC, they have maintained that oil must be sold with the dollar. And now Iran is not following that. And India, interestingly, is also not following that. And that's a huge blow to the empire, that you can buy oil without dollars.
Well, thank you for letting us know that. I did not see that. And of course I didn't see it, because if you're relying on Western media, why would you see something like that? What did you find out about it?
It was being circulated in Russian media. Russian media was making a big deal out of it because oil is very important. Russia is a leading oil and natural gas exporter. And Russian media was circulating this today and pointing out it just happened. The petrodollar is no longer the only currency that oil can be sold in. And this is a huge, huge blow. I mean, it's the same as, the canal that's being built in Nicaragua to counter the Panama Canal. China is building a canal through Nicaragua. It's the same as the high-speed trains that are connecting Russia and China, along with the natural gas pipeline. I mean, Wall Street really wants to control the world, and it wants to make sure that no independent economies can emerge and that everyone's kind of dependent and subservient to them. And that's changing. I mean, the world is drastically changing. My only fear is that this could lead to World War III. And the Wall Street financial class, these criminals that run the world, they will resort to militarism and war to maintain their grip on power. We've seen it happen so many times. And I just fear that the world is getting more and more dangerous as more and more people assert their independence.
Well, you're absolutely right. Not only that, but the world and society, the United States included, is being held back, deliberately held back. Progress is thwarted because the more progress comes out there, the harder it's going to be for them to control things. So you're absolutely right. Why isn't there another canal through Central America by now? Why isn't there a high-speed rail that, it's going to go from China to Madrid by the time they get done with it? How come the West didn't invest in stuff like this? Because they don't want it, because it's harder to control. You got a rail system like that. Well, suddenly the whole maritime situation, which is dominated by the United States, Great Britain, countries like that, is not going to be quite as important, is it?
No. I mean, technology can really advance. It's being held back by the fact that in the U.S., it's all about money and it's all about profits, and the economy is centered around making these Wall Street guys richer and richer. But in countries where that's not the case, and you have a kind of more of a societal controlled economy like you have in Russia and China and places like that, they're making huge feats of technological innovation. It's kind of amazing. I mean, there's no reason for technology to be where it's at in the U.S. I mean, we're inventing all kinds of new bombs and drones and weapons, and we're also, on Wall Street, they've got all kinds of tricks like derivatives and all kinds of complicated ways to make money. But in terms of actually taking care of people, things are really laxing. But you can see in this other poll that's emerging in the world economy, they have a very different orientation. They're much more collective and they're much more concerned about each other. And this is escalating. It's heading toward a situation. I feel like, we're living in a period almost very similar to the lead up to the Second World War in a lot of ways, because there are polls emerging in the global economy, and there are certain forces that are really trying to push us into a big confrontation. And
I think it's a little more like the lead up to the First World War, actually, where Germany was emerging as a major technological power, and their military, which was always pretty strong on the land, was emerging as a great naval power. And the British wanted to nip them in the bud before they got too strong. I think now it's China and the return of Russia, and the fact that those two countries are waking up and saying we're getting sick and tired of trying to play ball with these crooked, these crooked Americans and British and so forth, and they're deciding to cooperate with each other. Ray McGovern, the CIA analyst, Russia analyst, speaks Russian, briefed presidents in the morning briefing on Russia. He said he can't believe that the work they did so hard to split Russia and China apart has now gone in the total opposite direction, that they've been so careless and drunk with power in that brief moment of the unipolar world, like it was going to, Fujikama, did you ever read his stupid book, The End of the World?
End of History, yeah.
End of History.
Fukuyama, yeah.
Yeah, it's stupid. They pay you to write anything, I guess, But,
yeah, well, and it's not that the Russians and the Chinese haven't tried to be friends with the United States. They really have. I mean, they've really made big efforts to accommodate, but at the same time, they also want to have a good society there. I mean, the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union was a huge disaster in Russia. I mean, mass starvation and just chaos, but Putin got society in order. I mean, he did it. He got the country back to normal. People's wages have tripled since then, and he's done it by maintaining, Russian government control of oil and natural gas. And he's been prosecuting some of the big corporations, and they don't like Putin. And Putin has tried to be their friend. He met with Bush, and Bush, looked into his heart and saw that he was a good man. And I mean, they've really tried to accommodate the United States, but the U.S. continues to provoke Russia and China. The same with China now. The U.S. military is just pouring into Asia. They call it the Asian pivot. And it's very extreme. We hear about the Chinese building an island in water that they control, but the U.S. is sending, military forces rapidly into South Korea, into the Philippines, into Thailand, into Singapore, just building military bases all around China. And they're also moving forces into Central Asia as well. The U.S. is trying to surround China and is threatening China. They've got this Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a trade deal that basically locks China out. It's an interesting situation.
It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. I can understand that the Western oligarchs have been on top. Lucky for them, China decided to withdraw from the world stage in the 1600s, right when we were coming out of the Dark Ages and getting into our wooden ships and going all over the place and acting like the Vikings and taking everything that we could wherever we saw it. And that's had its run, I think. It's had its run. You can only go so far, just milking people. And you can't do it anymore. They're running out of room. They're running out of, people are waking up. People are saying no. Major countries that were not in play. China, India coming online, big country. Of course, you got the BRICS. You got Iran, Brazil. And Russia was a factor before, but not a capitalist factor or a somewhat capitalist factor. What about how you mentioned at the end of the Soviet Union, the disaster in Russia that occurred was no accident, right? We sent the wrecking crew in there with this bogus free market stuff, didn't we?
Yeah, Jeffrey Sachs, who is now considered to be this great economist out of Columbia University, he is responsible for the death of millions of Russians. I mean, in terms of what he did in that country, just presiding over the privatizations. I mean, they just it was like everything was just pulled out from underneath all the Russian people in a matter of days or something. I mean, it was just mass starvation over the country. I mean, it got to the point that some of these corporations, these private corporations, they were not even paying taxes because they had bigger armies than the actual military, right? And Russia was just completely destroyed in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And you add on top of that in Chechnya, that separatists who were being funded by the CIA were just bombing the country and tearing it apart. And Russia was just having a really, really bad time. And so Vladimir Putin emerges as a figure who's trying to, bring the country back together, trying to bring some order and stability to the country. And he puts some of these, these wealthy oil capitalists, he puts them in jail. And he gets the economy in order. And he's not doing it because he's a communist or a Marxist or anything like that. He's doing it because he likes Russia and he wants people to be able to walk the streets at night without the fear of crime. It's interesting. Bill Bradley, I saw Bill Bradley, the former senator from New Jersey, speak.
I campaigned for him in '88.
Yeah, and he was describing, he went over to Russia recently, and he was saying that it was like, the aftermath of the Cold War. It was a winner-take-all situation. And furthermore, the U.S. promised that NATO wouldn't move any further east, and NATO continues to expand. And so there's a military threat against Russia. The country was destabilized, and so now Putin has emerged as a force of strength in the region.
And this is an educated country. This is a technology country. This is a Christian country, by the way, which, had that ripped out of it during the communist era. There's a return to sort of a Byzantine ethos. And it's a very, very interesting thing. They're coming back. And they should. It's half European, half Asian. It's its own thing. You can't control Russia. The British have tried. Everybody's tried it. It's just too damn big.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Christian revival going on in Russia right now because they see, Orthodox Christianity as being a big part of their national culture. And it's interesting, Orthodox Christianity has kind of evolved. It was tolerated during the time of the Soviet Union, but it wasn't really promoted and it was suppressed if it ever became, problematic or was really questioning the leading party. But then now there's kind of a new kind of thing. A lot of Russians really admire Stalin. They see Stalin as a leader of their country when it defeated the Nazis, when it was strong, and when it became an industrial power. And they see they're kind of merging the history.
Well, listen, we have no more time. You'll have to come back on because I want to talk about the Orthodox Church's, push for new banking and getting rid of usury. But that'll be another show. Caleb Maupin. All right, friends, we'll be back next week.